Welcome to the Fast Times podcast. I'm Adam Nathan, and this is Tom Wolf. And today on the show, we have San Francisco District Attorney Brooke Jenkins. Since 2022, Brooke has been turning around how San Francisco does public safety. She's been aggressively prosecuting fentanyl dealers to help shut down the open-air drug markets that San Francisco has unfortunately become famous for, and everybody in the city is noticing. For the first time in 5 years, San Franciscans feel like the city is more on the right track than not. And so today with Brooke, we're going to dive into what motivates her as a public servant and a prosecutor, where we still have work to do in the city on public safety, how blue city Democrats can rebuild trust around public safety and crime, and what success on public safety really looks like. It's an exciting time to be talking to Brooke. She recently won re-election with 65% of the vote, a clear mandate to keep up her amazing work.
Yes.
And we now have a new mayor who's been a great champion of public safety to work alongside her. So welcome to the show, Brooke.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So first, we want to start with a bit of your background. What made you want to practice law in the first place and become a prosecutor?
So the true story is that as a kid, I used to watch Matlock, which tells people my age. Came on Thursday nights at 8. And that really inspired me. I wanted to be that person who stood up to ask that final question that, made the case. I started off actually, though, not really knowing what type of law I wanted to practice. And so I ended up kind of being shepherded into corporate law for the first half of my career. So for almost 8 years, I was in corporate law until really the tragic death of my infant son, my first son, who was born prematurely and didn't live very long. But it was at that point I was really at a turning point in my life of sort of trying to figure out what my purpose would be. And I had met some prosecutors in the couple years prior to that that seemed to really love what they did for a living and found meaning in their careers, but I never pursued it until after I lost my son. And I really felt like maybe being a voice for someone else who was dealing with tragedy or trauma or, a bad circumstance could be my purpose. And from day one, that is how I felt, even in misdemeanors.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that. I'm curious about your evolution as a prosecutor. You worked under some progressive DAs, Chesa and Gascon, and now you're perceived as a moderate Democrat. What was your shift from then to now?
Yeah, so I was hired by George Gascon in 2014. And I would say at that point in time in his career, he was a bit more balanced. Yes, he was considered a progressive prosecutor, but when it came to violent crime, it was something that we in the office took very seriously. Property crime, perhaps, I think he was more known as being lenient with, but we tried to balance it a bit more than what he did in LA. And so I think at the beginning, I thought I got a good example of being open to alternatives to incarceration, but doing it responsibly, making sure that we really addressed violent crime appropriately, but getting a sense for yourself of sort of what you needed to do as far as property crime, it varied. Obviously, when Chesa came in, it was a complete 180. I mean, it was no desire on his administration's part to prosecute. I was in the homicide unit at that time. And so I thought my cases would be exempt from those policies, but they were not. And I think I got a clear example of the abuse of the term progressive prosecutor. That doesn't mean non-prosecutor. And so, yes, I'm not deemed as a progressive prosecutor, although I think I subscribe to the notion that we have to be more thoughtful about our outcomes. Not everybody needs to go to prison. Not everybody needs to be in jail. But what we can't allow is, chaos in our streets. We have to be thoughtful about what accountability looks like for every individual that we prosecute. And I think in that regard, I tend to be more progressive in that I'm open to responsible alternatives. And I want to hold people accountable in fulfilling, right, following through with the program that we allow them, to engage in, so that they change their lives and hopefully we don't see them back into the system again. But yes, I've been given, I don't even know that moderate would be fair as far as what I've been given the title of. I think I've been deemed tough on crime and sort of taking us back, to the old days of lock everybody up, which couldn't be further from the truth with me. But I will hold a hard line that sometimes you have to put people on a little timeout while we figure out what the path is for them, because we can't let them keep spiraling while we figure that out.
I'm curious, in the same way you had like a clarion call around what you wanted to do with your life, was there a moment in time where you realized, what progressive prosecutor meant was kind of a distorted concept, or was it a
I think it was around the time that Chesa came into office, and I started to see what he was doing. Fully embraced it with George, and felt that at that time in San Francisco, he embodied what it meant. Um, but then I started to see Chesa, Pam Price, the Gascon of LA. And then I said, okay, this is just non-prosecution, right? There's nothing progressive about allowing neighborhoods to be overrun with crime. There's nothing progressive about saying you can do whatever you want to the detriment of everyone around you, right? You took prosecutor out of it, right? The title no longer even contained prosecutor anymore. And that's where I thought it went off the rails.
well, it seems like you had this insight and acted on it and clearly been rewarded by voters with your reelection. Why do you think the Democratic Party at large has lost its way on public safety?
I think we've become too ideological as a party. I think we stopped focusing on outcomes and on um, delivering what we are supposed to our constituents, and instead dug our heels in on a viewpoint or a perspective and an ideology. And people want results from government, right? I want my trash picked up
Yeah.
every
basics.
Thursday morning at
Yeah.
9. I want no potholes in the street. I want, right, all the things that we're supposed to have provided by government, which includes clean and safe streets. And we see what happens when we don't have clean and safe streets. And I think as a party, we are reckoning still with, is it about entrenching ourselves in ideological viewpoints and arguing those? Or is it about delivering the product that people want? Because we can subscribe to more progressive values, but still deliver on people's expectations, right? Of the things that we're supposed to deliver. And I think we've lost sight of that. And I don't think that's changed. I still see that playing out in Washington right now. As a party, we still aren't being able to combat, right?
We
Trump and what he's doing, because nobody can agree
Mhm.
on what positions we'll take.
One of the things I've noticed is in representative government in California, in the Assembly and in the Senate, that there's definitely an aversion to promoting public safety as policy, right? There's all this movement towards decriminalization or reducing penalties to promote equity, which I understand the concept, right? But then the reality is that things like Prop 36 happened as a result of that. I know not everybody agreed with that, but it did pass with 69% of the vote. And the reason I bring that up is that I think back to a few years ago when I was advocating for something called Alexander's Law in the state assembly, which was a fentanyl admonishment for drug dealers who get convicted of selling fentanyl, warning them that if you get convicted again and somebody dies from the drugs that you sold, you could be charged with murder or manslaughter. And I remember, testifying in front of the Senate Public Safety Committee 2 years in a row, once being backed by a Republican state senator and once being backed by a Democratic state senator. And both times those were shot down. And I remember telling one of the state senators on the panel, on the committee, that you understand that your unwillingness to be pragmatic about this and work with these parents who've lost their kids from fentanyl poisoning and overdose is going to result in something that's going to be more punitive. And that was Prop 36 that came along. And then it's funny because now Prop 36 is passed and there's still a lack of desire or a lack of action in representative government, again, to fund what's necessary to actually implement it, despite the fact that it's the will of the people. So what can we do at the local level to ensure that at least we're doing our part in respect of the actual law that's on the books now, which is Prop 36 and how it changes things?
We have to do our jobs, right? And again, I think it's about restoring confidence in the electorate that somebody who identifies as a Democrat can get the job done. So at its core, it's perform the function that you are supposed to, right? And providing the things that government is supposed to provide. It's also educating voters on who the candidates are. Because what I find is that candidates like to espouse ideals and a perspective, but they don't necessarily always explain what the implementation will look like of how they arrive at those ideals. And that's where the voters get deceived. So nobody says, I'm going to decriminalize, everything under the sun. What they say is, historically, people of color have been disadvantaged in the system, and we should make sure that our criminal justice system is more fair. Well, who would disagree with that? No one. They don't say how they will achieve the changes or the reform. And then they start to do these things, it starts to have a negative impact in our lives, and then we have to come and course correct. And I think we have to do better about challenging candidates with forcing them to explain, well, what does the implementation look like? You're saying you subscribe to an ideal, but what are you actually going to do once you get elected so that we can vet these people better? Because I agree with you, nothing seems to be changing. They are ignoring the electorate. Many of them, spend more time in Sacramento, sadly, than they might in the neighborhoods that they represent. And so people are crying out for help because their neighborhoods are, again, being overrun by crime and other things, homelessness, you name it. And the people who are supposed to be helping are actually tying the hands of those who need to be trying to solve the problems.
Great. Let's talk about the addiction crisis in San Francisco and the fentanyl crisis and the drug dealers, because one of the centerpieces or cornerstones of my advocacy the last 5 years was basically calling out the fact that we weren't doing anything about and allowing an organized drug dealing network to become entrenched in San Francisco and take over like 90 to 95% of the street dealing that's out there. And then, compound that with the arrival of illicit fentanyl. And you have this massive crisis of 4,000 overdose deaths since 2020 in San Francisco. And at one point, a couple of years ago, before you came into office, SFPD arrested made 900 arrests of drug dealers, about 300 of them repeat offenders, right? So, we estimated at one point there was 500 to 1,000 organized drug dealers on the street in San Francisco. So basically SFPD arrested everybody, okay, that was selling drugs at one point. How come they're back out on the street? What's going on with that?
Oh, so now we're going to get into the
Let's get into it.
Stuff.
Let's get into it, because I know you're doing your job. I know SFPD and DMAC's doing their job. So who's not doing their job, and what can we as the electorate or the constituents of the city, of the Bay Area, because it affects us all, what can we do to change that?
So your last question, what can we do, is the hardest question of them all. What I will say is when I took over, yes, the Tenderloin, no matter where you went, there were 20 to 30 drug dealers on every block. It was very abundantly clear. I took the position that for our repeat offenders, for people who had excessive amounts of fentanyl in their possession, even if it was a first arrest, that we had to do something different. We had to ask that the court hold them in custody, which is something that was very abnormal at the Hall of Justice for drug dealing cases throughout my time at the DA's office. And so the way that I argued this point was that this is like no drug we've ever seen. And we do have people dying 2 to 3 a day at this point. They're committing murder in a sense. And so this is a crisis that surpasses homicide, right? We have more people dying at the hands of fentanyl than guns and knives combined in San Francisco. And we have to treat it as such. My office began to file motions to detain these dealers without bail. And just time and time again, we're having these motions denied. The judges weren't entertaining it at all. And so imagine that's when we were asking for it, let alone under Chesa when we weren't, right? And so the courthouse has not adjusted their thinking to fentanyl. They're treating fentanyl like crack. At least at that point in time, they were. And so these folks were being allowed to cycle in and out of the courthouse back onto the street, pick up another case. And when I took over, it took about 5 separate arrests and case filings before a judge would hold someone in. I think we're at about, from what I understand from our latest data, 2 to 3 cases.
That's
At
an
case
improvement.
2 or 3,
Yeah.
now they will stay in. And so we have made some ground.
Right.
Most people would say second chance for sure. You got to stay in. But we've made a lot of ground from where we were when I first started filing these motions. But that is the biggest impediment to really addressing this. You have to teach people how to behave. And if you signal to them that their behavior will be tolerated, they will continue to do what they are doing. And so as far as what people can do, right now I think we're at a crossroads. Of course, we all respect judicial independence. We want them to make the decisions that they think are according to the law. But we also know that they have to take into consideration public safety. And I think that they need to be educated on the dangers of fentanyl, on what's happening, on what it's doing to communities, right? These are people often who don't live in San Francisco, right? Who are serving on the bench. They're not walking through the Tenderloin with their minor children, having to see the things that these children are having to see. And so I think it's about really even community saying, we invite you to come and hear from us, not to directly influence a decision, but so that you understand when you are conducting a public safety analysis for someone's conduct and whether they should be out, what effects their conduct is having on the community.
When I was out on the street and I started getting arrested, I got arrested 6 times. And after my 6th arrest, I had to spend some time in county jail in San Bruno. And after about 3 months, I was offered a choice. I could continue to stay in jail, or I could go to residential drug treatment. So I guess I was going to ask you the question, should we be mandating people into treatment? But I think the better question is should we be giving people a choice that end up in custody that are struggling with substance use disorder, of whether or not they should either face the consequences of their actions, like shoplifting, stealing, holding drugs like I was doing, or have an opportunity to make a correction in their life and actually go off to treatment?
People should always have the opportunity to correct their lives. I mean, one of the most important things that I tell my lawyers in the office is we want to put people in a position not to simply come back in the front door of the courthouse with another case, right? Don't just circle back to us with a new case because we just put you back out in the same circumstance that you came to us in. And a part of that is giving people the option to change their lives. I hear a lot of criticism, particularly from the public health community, that you can't compel treatment. And I tell them, in our system, we don't compel anyone. We don't force anyone to get treatment. They're always given the option. You can sit and have something more punitive, right? Custody time, or you can make the choice to go into treatment. It's always in their, in their lap what choice they make for their lives. And it, as you said for yourself, sometimes takes multiple times before you make that choice. And we don't mind that. We're going to still keep putting it in front of you. But that should always be on the table because we want people to have the chance to be able to turn their lives around and become an addition to the community, right? And be able to help give back the way you're giving back to try to help those who still need to get into recovery.
I want to just ask you, talking about the public health community, about harm reduction. You talked before about ideologies
Yes.
and people not understanding the implications of a policy that might sound good on its face. You talked about ideologies becoming twisted and outdated over time once we get data on how they actually work. Do you think harm reduction is a failed policy?
I certainly do believe it's failed now. It doesn't work for this drug. It doesn't work for most communities. I like to say, show me where the harm is being reduced. Whose harm is being reduced? It's not the people who are dying. It's not their families. I met recently a 6-year-old boy. I was on a march through the south of Market against fentanyl. And a little boy who was 6 years old got up and spoke about his aunt who was 21 dying of a fentanyl overdose. I mean, these aren't throwaway people. These are people who have families. These are children who are having to see this happen and live with the repercussions of losing family members to it. Another young man who was there couldn't have been more than 21 who lost his mom to an overdose. So these are human beings who are being affected. And so their harm's not being reduced. The person who died, their harm's not being reduced. And then we see communities overrun with drug dealing, people strung out, right? Laying there in the ground, some of them defecating on themselves in public. Where's the reduction of the harm to that community and to the most often children who have to see this every day and think this is normal behavior, right? And so I do think it's a policy that has not been effective. We all want to be compassionate. We all want to try to meet people where they are. That doesn't mean I leave you there once I meet you there. My job is to try to shepherd you into a better life. And so, again, these are folks who have planted their flag in this ideology, refusing to look at the outcomes, refusing to acknowledge the harm that's being caused all over the place, and actually sit down at the table and come up with something more effective.
And one other policy on this front, it looks like from the data that a lot of the overdose deaths in the city, is along with a lot of other types of crimes, are happening in publicly funded housing for homeless people. I know Housing First is the name of this policy. I'm curious, do you think Housing First as a policy has been effective in helping to tackle addiction, people struggling with addiction, as well as the fentanyl crisis?
It's certainly not helping addiction. I mean, given we know that the majority of the overdose deaths right now are happening inside. So we know it's not combating that. Perhaps it gets people off the street so that they don't have to be seen. I don't know that that should be the sole objective. The objective should always be to help people improve their lives. We're in a fight right now. Matt Haney has a bill to allow for abstinence-based housing. It's crazy that we would have to be, fighting over whether or not there should be public housing for people who don't want drug use inside.
Mm-hmm.
That shouldn't even be a debate or a discussion.
Let's give them the option.
It's not allowable by law in the state of California right now, which is what this assembly bill would change. It would allow for up to 25% of funding to go to drug-free recovery housing, which seems like a no-brainer. But, this is the second year in a row they've tried this, and I'm deeply involved in that bill, and it got shelved last year. They didn't want any part of it in the state Senate, and this kind of brings me back to what I had talked about earlier about representative government kind of being stuck in this kind of ideological rut a little bit with some of this stuff.
And not listening to the voters. But also, this is what causes California to be the laughing stock of the country, right? These are the things that get put on Fox News. These are the things that the Trumpers use against us because it simply goes against common sense. Mm-hmm. Right? And so we have to get these kinds of things right if we want any chance in making sure that we can elect Democratic leaders in this country.
So what do we do? Because it feels like things are changing in San Francisco, certainly, but so much of the institutions and the infrastructure, the norms and the beliefs inside still seem, even after the last couple election cycles, to be tilted against common sense and what the data is pointing in terms of outcomes. So if you're a normal voter like me, between election cycles, voting in great people like you, what can we do?
I actually will say, I think San Francisco's on the right track. Mm-hmm. I think we have some work to do in other parts of the state. But I think we have to be a leader in San Francisco. And I think we've led on one thing, and I know that's making sure that we have district attorneys who are actual prosecutors, mm-hmm. right? It didn't stop with Chesa. They had an historic recall across the Bay in Alameda County. George Gascon lost his reelection as bad as my opponent lost up here to me, yeah. which says a lot when he was a well-known incumbent. And so I think we have paved the way that you can still be a Democrat, but get it right and stick to our fundamental values, right? Of clean conditions for our families to live in, to want to assist somebody in getting help when they need help. But I think the main thing that people have to do is stop being so quiet about what they believe. I like to say I represent the silent majority mm-hmm. all over the city because I try to elevate the voices of people who have felt that it is no longer safe to say what they believe, right? That the progressive activists have made them feel that if you say you want safety, that must mean you're a racist. Yep. Right? If you say you believe in recovery and not harm reduction, you must be a Republican. Mm-hmm. No. And so they've been quieted down. They've been silenced
do you know how many times I've been called a right-wing, fascist, Trumper, Nazi, all these things, right? I'm not ashamed. Like, people say that about me all the time. And I'm just like a regular guy that went through something really negative on the streets with homelessness and addiction. And now I speak out about it because the system that we have in place, helps perpetuate it in many ways. And yet you have this very loud, vocal minority of people that also have a lot of power because a lot of them are involved in the public health space.
But let's talk about what else they have, Tom. They have privilege.
These
They have
aren't-
privilege.
They do.
They don't have that experience that you have. And that's the part of the problem is it's the people who have so much privilege who have not lived in the horrors that you went through, right? Who have not had to bury a child to homicide, who have not had to walk their preschooler through people hunched over, smoking fentanyl in public, right? Hoping their child doesn't breathe it in, telling them to step over
These aren't
human waste that's on the sidewalk, right? That's not their reality. They live a much nicer life,
Yeah.
privileged life. And so we have to, I think, get back to a place where we call that out and say, right, the people who are living these things have a voice and have a perspective that we have to respect and honor. But that's not happening. But I think, again, it's about those voices elevating to the top and being loud the way yours is and being willing to take the punches of, okay, fine, you want to call me a Republican, you want to call me, whatever you want to say.
Yeah.
I know that I speak for everyone around me who is just asking for basic human rights, like safety.
Yeah. That's brilliant, Brooke. Thank you. Thank you for saying that. Man, it's just super refreshing to hear that coming from an elected official, to hear you speak like that, especially in San Francisco, knowing how it has been. Like, if you think about some of the supervisors that we had prior to this past election and the DA, and even, it's just been rough. So it's very refreshing to hear that.
Well, I want to ask about, you talked about feelings there. And I think one thing that was infuriating, I don't know, a couple of years ago was that in San Francisco and also around the country, but especially here, my friends would complain and talk about car break-ins or talk about needles on the street or people defecating in public places. And a lot of the elected officials would say, like, no, you don't understand. Like, crime is actually down, or violent crime is down. And Democrats were doing this at a national level on things like immigration. But just talking about San Francisco, it's clear that safety is a feeling as much as it is a stat. And people need to feel safe, especially people who are affected by it or more exposed to it. So how do you measure success, not just in ways that are not just through the data in your office and about how you're moving the needle on public safety?
It is through both, right? It's multifaceted. We have to look at data, not just even generally, but across crime types, across neighborhoods, right? One neighborhood might have crime down, but another has it up. Maybe we displaced people who are committing crime to another area of our city. We need to be looking at that data to see, because it is not all created equal, right? The people who live in Seacliff aren't going to have the same complaints about crime as the people in the Mission. And so it might be down in Seacliff, but it might be up in the Mission. The other thing is, you're right, we have to account for how people feel. That is a part of my metric. And that's why I spend so much time outside, going to community meetings and events, is because I have to be able to hear from people all over San Francisco about, do you see it's getting better? Do you feel it's getting better? What is your experience in our city right now? Because that makes a difference. I need to talk to people who commute in and find out, when you get off the BART train or park your car, what is your experience when you're walking to your office building? What is the experience of tourists who visit, right? And so until we have people who feel safe, they don't want to hear, as you said, about what crime stats say.
How do you gauge that? Like, when you're in the room listening or watching, is there something that you're looking for, something that you track instinctively?
I track what they say. Trust me, they can tend to be very vocal if it's not right. And I have certain communities, the Castro being one of them, they will not hold back, right? If things are not what they expect it to be. And I appreciate those communities who are very outspoken and who hold us to the highest standard. But it's also beyond just meetings, right? I'm out as just a San Franciscan every day, getting lunch, taking my kids to their games or, out to shop. And so it's about what people say to me then, what the employee at the store says to me who recognizes me and whether it's gotten better for them, with respect to retail theft. Do people come up to me and say, it feels so much better? And that happens every day. And so I take all of that into account as just a little bit of guidance on, okay, we're headed in the right direction.
You said before that more change needs to happen at the state level. And I would love your perspective too on this, Tom, as a resident policy expert. What changes to state law would help you be more effective in your role?
We need more moderate state representatives, period. The state legislature has been overtaken by people who are far too radical and who are not implementing common sense policies. I also think we need reform to how many bills come through our legislature. No single assembly person should be advancing 20 bills in a single legislative session. That is too many. And so we need to get back to a point where we force them to focus on what matters and what's really important, so that maybe we can be more productive in what actually gets passed. It's funny. I have a bill right now that's that we co-sponsored with Damon Connolly, the representative out of Marin County, for prison reform, pushing for a pilot for 10% of the cells at 4 state prison facilities be single occupancy. So these individuals not have to share a cell. So much of that is based in cellmate on cellmate violence and what happens, rapes, murders, stabbings, and the hypervigilance that these inmates have to have in trying to make sure that they are not assaulted or killed, but also in providing a more rehabilitative environment. If you can not have to deal with stress, if you can get sleep, right? If you can keep your dignity and not having to use the bathroom in front of someone every time you need to go, then that promotes rehabilitation. That is a bill that's going to stall in the Appropriations Committee right now, despite the fact that it really won't cost the state very much.
Because there's so many bills.
There's so many bills, and there's a belief and a perception, I think, by some activists that we should simply shut down prisons rather than make the ones that we have to have be more humane. And again, we lose sight of the objective here. There are people, many of whom I meet with in San Quentin quite frequently, who will tell you they needed to go there. Do they want to die there? No. Do they deserve to die there? No. But they needed to go there, and that it's been a place that's helped them reform the way that they think. But we need to give them living conditions that are humane.
Right.
And we can't even agree on that. We would rather them live as they are, right? And in unhealthy ways, because we're going to plant our flag in the ideology that we should abolish prisons.
It's frustrating for me because, so look, I'm a moderate Democrat. I consider myself kind of a centrist. And it's my own experience that changed my views, because I used to be more progressive when I was younger. But then when I actually went through homelessness and the criminal justice system and had some accountability and saw what that was really like, and then I saw how screwed up it was for everyone out there on the street. And nobody was coming to help them except handing them hygiene kits with clean needles and foil pipes and straws. That actually kind of changed my view. So I 100% agree with you, but I wanted to kind of change gears a little bit and talk a little bit about homelessness, because homelessness, there is an intersectionality, obviously, with the criminal justice system. I want to make it clear to everyone who's going to listen or watch this, it's not against the law to be homeless, right? It's about behaviors that are sometimes exhibited as a result of someone experiencing homelessness or someone experiencing addiction that lead to a law enforcement intervention, right? But one thing I wanted to ask you about is back when, after the Supreme Court ruled on the Johnson versus Grants Pass case last year, and the city made a decision now that saying, okay, we're going to start removing encampments. And they went into Willow Alley, which I'm sure you're very familiar with because it's been a constant encampment, 25 to 30 tents at a time. And the first sweep that they did when they went in there, according to SFPD, who I talked to, said that about 25% of the people in that encampment had an open bench warrant, either in San Francisco or in another county. And they found a dead body inside of a tent that had been there 48 to 72 hours, and everybody on the block knew that that body was in there, but they didn't want the cops to come because it would interrupt the whole
Party.
interrupt the party. Can you kind of talk about the issues around that and what you're doing in the DA's office to try to mitigate that when those cases come across your desk or your office?
We have a significant problem with bench warrants. So bench warrants, right, are people who have failures to appear in court when they've been ordered to come back on a case. We have about 500 defendants that have open bench warrants. And that is a real problem because one, they never have accountability. But two, right, it adds to the cases that my staff is having to monitor instead of us being able to move those cases through the system. Some of those cases involve victims who are just sitting in abeyance, waiting. And yes, a big part of this issue is many of these folks are right here on our streets. It requires specific types of operations to go out and just address trying to find folks with warrants. But the other thing that you mentioned is really key, which is many of the people on our streets have warrants out of other counties.
Mm-hmm.
They are not from here, and they have criminal cases elsewhere that they need to address. And right now that's become a topic of discussion with the mayor's office and the police department and the sheriff's department as to how we are going to facilitate helping people return back to their home counties so that they can have accountability there, and so that they stop thinking that San Francisco streets are their place of refuge so that they don't have to address those out-of-county cases.
Awesome.
You're such a good speaker, and I'm so glad I voted for you, and that you're such a leader here. But you're in an interesting position because, as you said, the DA has like a legal function, a role in the system, but you're also a politician. You're an elected official. How do you think about balancing those two, but specifically your role as a political leader?
Great question. The work inside the office is apolitical, right? It is, and I've been very clear that politics will not ever come into our office and the work that we have to get done. People should be able to trust in who are touching the system that it is about facts and case law, and that's it. And that we will make whatever decision we believe is fair and just and appropriate. Where politics comes in, I think, is more the vision for the work and the tone that we take as a city. And I've tried to just do it from a place of honesty. I did not plan on becoming a politician. I really, my dream at that point was just to be a homicide prosecutor. I could relate to people who had to bury their children. And so I was extremely happy doing that. But I think people need honesty, and the silent majority needs to have their voices elevated. And so where the politics comes in is trying to set a tone for the way that public safety should be prioritized, right? And the way that we should accomplish achieving public safety, and stepping in and saying, handing out foil and straws is probably not the best policy decision to assisting people in committing slow suicide. And those, I think that's where you get into the politics of it, is what policy positions may be a bit more controversial, and being willing to put your voice to what you believe. And I think we've, again, found that either people just want votes or they're too scared to speak up. But I have to come from a place of conviction and set aside everything else.
I've had a lot of politicians tell me in private what they really think about open drug scenes and the homeless crisis and the fentanyl crisis. But you're one of a very small handful of people that will say it publicly right now. I'll just say that. And that's the truth.
What do you say to people? You're right that San Francisco's made a lot of progress. Generally, it seems like the perception of the city, both with residents and outsiders, is changing for the better. But I get phone calls from friends all the time that have their kids have to walk around needles on the street. Yesterday, all the people that have been pushed out of the Tenderloin to make it clean are now in my neighborhood in DuBose Triangle. And there was 2 guys in the cafe, and there's a guy defecating like on the block where my dog walks. And I texted Tom and I was like, what the fuck? And so what do you say when you encounter residents that still feel like there's so much work to do in the city to, how do you respond to that as a leader?
I assure them that we're not done. My foot is on the gas. I hear you. I see you. I see some of these things. I experience some of these things. I have them in my own neighborhood on occasion happening. So I try to reassure them that they can have confidence that I will do my job, right? And that I don't think it's done.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not resting on my laurels. I don't think we've, okay, we can just, relax now. But also that I will put pressure on the other parts of our city government that are responsible for some of these things that aren't law enforcement, right? When you talk about the behavioral health crisis on our streets, when you talk about people who aren't necessarily committing a crime out in public, they might even be getting high inside and coming outside and then passing out on our sidewalk. They need treatment that should at that point come from outside of the criminal justice system. So that's a public health issue, right? We have to be putting pressure on all these other levers to make sure that they're holding up their end of the bargain as well. And so I try to just let people know, I'm not saying, okay, my office is, now done its thing. And so I can just sit back. I'm saying, I'm trying to speed this train up.
Mm-hmm.
I understand displacement. And that, again, if we don't help these people get treatment, they're just going to move most of the time.
Yep.
And so we have to be capable of getting in front of displacement. And that means having outcome-based, expectations for what our street outreach looks like. Is it just, okay, you made contact and we're satisfied with that? No.
That's kind of what's happening now, though. I mean, they check the box. Oh, we made 9,000 contacts, and only 2% of them accepted actual services.
Are the city contracts that we have with treatment providers, are those treatment providers actually being successful in the outcomes of the people who they treat?
Amen.
Right? We shouldn't just be pouring money into organizations that are failing.
Yep.
But what I will say is that I have a confidence based on conversations that I've had with our new public health director, the new chief of public health for the city, that they get it, and that a lot of that mindset is changing. And so we'll see. I think we have a shot at getting there.
To that end, there's been a lot of change in the mayor's office. You were appointed by Mayor London Breed. Now we have Mayor Daniel Lurie. What have been some of the key differences you noticed working with both of them?
I think everything's a transition. Mayor Breed and I were able to develop a very good and close relationship and pretty quickly. And so I think there was a comfort level there. I think of course, with Daniel Lurie, we're getting to know each other. We're developing a rapport and a style of communication. I would say he's come in obviously with a lot of new ideas and different people who have different ideas. And so it's really us all coming to the table and saying, okay, what do you think about these ideas, and what does it mean to accomplish that, right? What resources is it going to take? How do we align those priorities with things that have already been working and functioning in the city? But I think, it all takes time. It takes a lot of conversation. But I think we all want the same thing for the city.
How about the Board of Supervisors? It kind of flipped to kind of a more moderate position, thank goodness, because we literally had like a couple of Democratic Socialists. We still have one, but we had two. And anyway, I don't want to get too political, but you know what I'm saying. How is it different now than it was like a year ago working
Night
with
and
them?
day.
Night and day.
Night and day. And I would say that's the biggest thing too, when you talk about what Mayor Breed had to put up with when she walked into the board chamber or in dealing with them. It's night and day. We have the majority of the supervisors fundamentally respect the job that I have to do. They are not antagonistic with me for the first time, most of them. And so I think we're, again, on the right track as a city in saying we want change. and we want people who agree with the change.
Right. That's huge. Okay, so I got to ask, because you're like my favorite politician. Well, sorry, Daniel Lurie, I really like you too, but you're like my favorite politician in San Francisco. You know, and you're DA, you're serving a full 4-year term right now. What's the future looking like for you politically?
Oh, I have no idea. I have no idea. I think there's a lot of predictions happening out there.
Oh, I
and
have some predictions.
a lot of chatter.
I'll throw some
but-
out there, but you know.
This is the first time in 3 years I haven't had to campaign or run for anything. My kids are small. My son is 5, my daughter is 8. Right now I'm kind of in a space of like, I can breathe and do the job, be a mom. And so I'm not sort of sitting here calculating the next
The
move,
next move.
but I do get a lot of inbound with a lot of ideas for what it should
I'll
be.
calculate happily for you, don't worry. So I have lots of ideas for you to rise up through state politics. So anyway, I hope
Well,
that
thank you.
happens because you're definitely a huge asset to San Francisco.
Thank you.
Huge asset.
They laugh when I say I won't retire as the DA, but I said I don't think I'll get elected that many times until it's time for me to retire.
I don't know about that.
I don't know. I don't know. You have a chance if that's really what you wanted to do.
Do you, your job's really intense. Do you turn off at all? How do you relax? Is this constantly in your mind? It sounds like you have kids, which I'm sure is a huge priority, but how do you kind of make sure that you have the stamina to run this marathon?
It's really hard to turn it off, because even if it's not the office work you're trying to turn off, it's the political environment and trying to navigate politics. I'm a person who wakes up, and after the kids go to school, I have to get a workout in. It kind of helps me set the day and clear my head and have a moment just to have my thoughts. I tend to watch sports as my outlet. So I'm really sad about the Warriors
Me too.
losing last
Bummer.
night. So I think that's the best thing, along with, yes, when I walk through the door, it is mommy, and my attention is being directed to whatever it is that I'm being demanded to now look at or talk about. So they have no problem demanding my attention when they want it. And I think that helps to balance it as well. But it's really hard. It's really hard. You drive through the city. I drive through the city each and every day. And, I might pass a certain corner that looks worse than it did a week before. I see things, right? I might go into a store. The shelves are half empty, and I'm being told that it's because, right, somebody cleaned them out the day before. You don't ever stop thinking about that and what you can do to make it better and what conversations you need to have with other officials to help combat it. It doesn't turn off, because it's a part of, what you're responsible for doing.
Well, I know you said you didn't plan on becoming DA, but you seem to be a natural at it. And we are so grateful that
thanks.
you're in this role in the city. And I hope that you stay there for a very, very long time, because we have more work to do, but it's great that you're leading the way.
No, thank you. Thank you. It takes the support, really.
And you can edit this out if you want to, but if you ever decide to run for Attorney General,
I got your back.
you have my full support.
Well, thanks, Tom. Thanks.
Well, Brooke, it's been amazing talking to you. Thank you for your time today out of your busy schedule. And for those of you listening in, especially if you live in San Francisco, we'd love to hear from you on Twitter or on YouTube. Do you feel like your life is safer now than it was a couple years ago? What still needs work? And what do you wish Democrats here in San Francisco and nationally were doing to further increase our commitment to public safety? So we'd love to hear from you. Make comments or likes or shares or whatever you got to do to spread this amazing interview with Brooke. Thanks for listening to Fast Times. We will see you next time.
See you later.